Fresh and all right, welcome back to another episode of Fresh and Buds. I am your host, Tommy Fresh, and you all are my buds. And I am joined by a bud today that, well, let's be honest, needs no introduction, Mr. Hayden Dale. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing very, very well. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm excited to have you on. But before we get into everything, I do want to give a shout out to the Patreon that has helped me keep the mics a little hot and the lights on here in Jersey, and it's been great. You guys can check it out. All that stuff will be in the show notes. It's kicking over there. So, but I do want to get to the episode with you, Hayden. First off, we did meet in Jersey. And you were so kind to come over and chat with me while I had the big stupid sign on my back. But how did you enjoy being in New Jersey, which is my home state, by the way?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you were hard to miss, so made it easy. I had the best time. I mean, being at the very first inaugural Pro Tour for Flesh and Blood was just an amazing experience in and of itself. And then the atmosphere at the venue, plus meeting so many people. Not only did I get to actually play the Pro Tour, but just have an amazing experience of the weekend as well. So I got the best of both worlds, and then I spent some time in New York, and of course we were staying in New Jersey. So had a couple of days either side to just kind of explore and see what the state has to offer. So yeah, I had a really good time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great to hear. And it's been beat to death at this point how amazing that weekend was, and the atmosphere and the energy in that room. But it really was incredible. So it is worth pointing out. Now, how did you do in the Pro Tour?
So finished top 16, so pretty happy with the kind of result. I think for us, we had a wider group of 4 or 5 of us. So one of us made top 8 in Sasha Markovic, and then I managed to make top 16. So definitely cannot complain. I mean, I got to play Kano at the Pro Tour. That's a pretty cool experience in itself. So I had tons of fun just with my matches in general. And then, yeah, in the end, a pretty good result.
Yeah, that was such a cool thing, and I don't know if it has been relayed to you, but the murmuring in that hall when people were kind of figuring out what you and your team were doing, it was pretty exciting. People were pretty amped, and it was awesome to see it like that plan really work out. I mean, obviously you guys put in a ton of work for that, but it's kind of what makes Flesh and Blood so great, right? We have these wide range of heroes that do a ton of different things, and it seems like any given tournament can kind of have something crazy happen, which had to have been cool. I don't know if anybody had told you that everybody was talking about it, because they sure were.
Yeah, people had told me. I mean, I think by sort of round 3 or 4, I had a handful of people come up and say to me, "Can't believe you guys are like just walking past you, like, can't believe you guys are on Kano, like awesome." I mean, for me, it was kind of maybe a bit different. Like I defaulted to Kano literally the day before. I'd been planning to play either Chain or Dash, and to Brendan and Sasha had kind of gone to this Kano deck as like I guess almost like a last resort to try and attack the meta in a way that was a bit different. Take a bit of a risk, right? Take a bit of a punt on this event, and just I guess players not respecting Arcane Barrier, people forgetting about Kano as a hero. I know Alexander Vord did basically the same thing. He's a master with that hero, so for him maybe it came a little bit more naturally, but yeah, it was. I guess I never really thought about people's reactions, because it wasn't something that really until about 24, 48 hours before I'd actually even considered playing. So, yeah, but it was really cool to see just kind of that conversation. And I guess I'm excited to see this happen in the future. I think this kind of shows that we're going to see, as the hero pool grows, we're going to see things like this happen. We're going to see heroes come out of the woodwork, even just over this past weekend at the world premieres and the callings, like Dorinthia was a hero that people just were not talking about at all, but had like a pretty good showing kind of around the three events. So, I think it'll continue to happen. I think it's a good thing for the game.
Yeah, it is really awesome. And I gotta say, man, that you changing your deck up 48 hours, 24 hours before the Pro Tour, to a deck like Kano and performing so well. And it really speaks to your talent, and that's awesome to hear. Now, you know, you are very much a mainstay in the Flesh and Blood community and the game itself, but I kind of want to dig a little bit into your own history, outside of Flesh and Blood. Do you think you could give us somewhat of a story of Hayden Dale, the person, not the player?
I can try. I mean, at this point, it feels like being a Flesh and Blood player is so ingrained in who I am over the past couple of years. But I mean, it hasn't always been, right? I mean, for me, I'm a 28-year-old Kiwi living in Australia. So I jumped across the ditch, as we say down here, about 5.5 years ago to work in what is kind of like my dream career, I guess, in some ways, which is I work for a fashion retailer as like a buyer. So I get to just like kind of do a lot of travel and see a lot of cool stuff and buy a lot of cool things, and that's kind of my job, which is so cool. And growing up in New Zealand, I guess it's a small country, right? I mean, it's 4.5 million people. If people don't know much about New Zealand, it's right at the bottom of the globe. And I think Flesh and Blood has obviously put it on the map. But growing up, I grew up in a pretty small town, and then I went to a slightly bigger city to study and do my high school and college and university. And as I guess as a young person, I just played a lot of sport and then got into card games, I guess, pretty early on. Played a lot of Magic the Gathering, which was great, and then took a break from sort of card games to focus on my sort of studies and just playing sport. And I guess being a college student, being a university student,
Yeah.
and as it is, a bit of drinking, a bit of enjoying, a bit of making friends, and some studying in there as well. And then, yeah, moved across to Australia 5.5 years ago, where I guess for a lot of New Zealanders do this, I think, for opportunity. It's about 6 or 7 times the size of the population of New Zealand. So bigger cities, more opportunity. It's a bit like, I guess, in the US, where people might move from smaller towns to college, university towns, and then move on to some of the bigger hubs around the country for their jobs, for their careers. And I kind of did something similar. So I guess that's a little bit of a story about me. And then a couple of years ago, kind of Flesh and Blood into my life.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you mentioned sport. What kind of sport were you into there, Hayden?
Oh, very New Zealand sports. So cricket, football, soccer. Sorry, you call it soccer. I know. And I did a lot of dancing as a younger kid, and sort of into my teenage years, rock and roll dancing. So that was a big part of my life as well. So a lot of different sort of sports, and but mostly those kind of three.
That's interesting. Rock and roll dancing, you said?
Yeah, rock and roll dancing. Yeah. So weirdly, not that big in New Zealand, but something that I just fell into when I was younger, and it was just I think the discipline and that sort of thing, and just something that I stayed with.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, actually, I had never really heard of rock and roll dancing. Obviously, I know some ballroom dancing and salsa and all that,
Yeah.
but I'll be looking that up after the podcast. I personally am a big cricket fan, and I'm one of my
Let's hear
favorite
it.
Kiwi players, Brendan McCullum.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, he's like just like one of those strategy guys that I just loved watching at
He's a
Skipper. But
very nice guy as well. I got to meet him once actually. He came into a store that I was working at, and he
oh
had a
my
chat.
god,
He's a very nice guy.
that's really cool. That's awesome to hear. And actually, we do have a cricket themed question coming up later. But now you mentioned Flesh and Blood came into your life. Tell us how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I had a acquaintance, or I guess a friend, might be a loose term, but someone that I'd known sort of over the years of playing Magic, and they had started working for LSS actually, and they had mentioned to me that that's what they were doing now, that I should go check out the game. And they said, "But there's this series coming to Sydney, and you can, it's a $10,000 prize pool." And I was like, I mean, we don't even have that for Magic really anymore. That sounds, fantastic. So I went along to, I guess, my local store in September of 2019, so the month before the Welcome to Wraith set released. I played the Ira decks, and I was like, yeah, this seems pretty cool. Like, it's pretty simple, but it seems like it'll be a solid game. And then I just remember like sitting at work one day, and they'd started doing like the release for, I guess, the preview season for Welcome to Wraith, their very first preview season. They actually started after the Ira deck. They started showing the cards off and what the game is about. And then one day they just dropped this article. James White just drops this article, and it's like introducing cycles. And then my mind was just like, no way. What, like this? The game was so much more than I'd already thought, and of course now, I mean, it's even far surpassed that. But that was kind of when it sort of came into my life, and then November 2019, I went along to the calling here in Sydney, and the rest is kind of history, I guess. Like the game just, of course, there was a few things in between, and a world that's so disrupted, but that was kind of how it started for me.
Did you, kind of being there at the beginning, did you have a feeling for how big it was going to be?
I think it felt like it was going to be successful. I mean, it's so hard to say now. I guess always in hindsight, you go, yeah, there was like something about it, but there definitely was something about it that felt like this is a good game. I guess it just was. It was hard to see how a small game from New Zealand could make it big, right? Just in terms of distribution and coverage and things like that. But I think even at these first sort of events, and you'd know this, right? You show players this game, it takes 2 or 3 games and they're hooked. Like it doesn't take much. It's always kind of been that way with Flesh and Blood, I think. So it definitely felt like there was something special there, and then just hearing I think James White's passion, like hearing him speak about it at the first ever calling, I thought that, he had a great game here, they had a great team, and actually his passion and his desire to make this succeed was what was going to drive it and get it out to players. So, yeah, I definitely didn't think it was going to be this big this quick, but I thought it would succeed.
That's awesome to hear. Now, something that people, and myself included, love about the game is how great the community is. Have you, as someone who not only has been there since the beginning, but also has been a content creator since basically the beginning, have you enjoyed seeing how great of a community and like it has a certain lack of toxicity, which is nice to see? How has that been? Kind of viewing. Do you worry that it might be short lived, or is this a flesh and blood thing?
You know what? At this point, I think it's a flesh and blood thing. I think it's the kind of it's part of it's the game, and part of it's the fact that this is an in-person game that gets cultivated by playing in the flesh and blood, I think. um, but I do also think like it's the community that's sort of grown, and not just the community that started the game, but the community that have developed over the time has just, I think it begets more of this kind of positive attitude and this true community attitude. And I honestly don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think you'll always have a handful of people come in and they will have louder voices, and they will make people feel like they are a bigger part of the community than maybe they are, and make people feel down about things, or question the future of the game, or even question their role in the community. But I think overall you have to say like this game's community has been amazing. I mean, it's what as much as I had an amazing time at the Pro Tour in terms of result and what we did, my time spent just interacting and being a part of that community was like the best part of it, hands down. It's not even close. I could go to all these events, scrub out, and still have the best time. Like it is a testament to what this community is, and I don't see it. It's been like that basically since the start, and it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger as more passionate players enter. And I think that's what it is. It's the passion that people have for this game that's what keeps the community so positive and keeps people building each other up. It keeps content creators building each other up. It keeps players building each other up. It keeps collectors and fans building each other up. So yeah, I don't see it going anywhere. And I think it just is about us as a community. I think focusing on that and continuing to be a together community and building each other up.
Yeah, and you mentioned content creators, and that's another thing that I do love about the games. Like every content creator seems to be collaborative and positive. I mean, you're on this podcast, and I've been on other people's podcasts. It's just great. It's just a good time to be, you know, in the game and creating content for it. And you have such positive voices. I mean, even if obviously Melody Likes on Twitter has a podcast now, but when she just started tweeting about it, it was just all positivity, and that's just it's just I think it's important going forward, especially for content creators.
Yeah, I think like having criticism of the game and constructive criticism is really important. Like it is important that we as players and community members give feedback to Legend Story Studios, to the creators in our community, to whoever is relevant. But the good thing is that for the most part, it's been really positive and it has been constructive, not destructive, right? Which is not always the case in a lot of both industries and communities. So it's
Yeah.
nice to see.
Well, that actually reminds me of the first kind of I saw anger when the box opening of Uprising
Mm.
happened last week, and it was a shame, and people were upset. But it was good to see after all the negative comments and toxic comments that a lot of people came out and said, "Hey, listen, this is not who we are," and like I felt like the course was corrected rather quickly, and I'm hoping that that continues going forward. Now, when did you know that Flesh and Blood would be such a major part of your life now?
Good
Was there like
question.
a specific moment?
Don't know if there's a moment. It just kind of happened, uh, not not that gradually. Actually, kind of happened quite quickly. I think I started writing some content for the game for Channel Fireball. I think I want to say a year and a half ago, just kind of casually. They had taken on the game as that sort of distribution role and what they were doing in North America, and I had a really nice conversation with LSV about the game. Actually, I was very lucky to have a conversation with him, and he actually had a lot of nice things to say about the game, and got to play a few games with him. I wrote a few pieces for them. Writing wasn't something that I actually really enjoy writing. It was something that I missed from sort of my days writing my thesis, but it wasn't really as sustainable from like a time perspective. And then I met Brendan Patrick, and then we had a conversation, and we decided to kind of start Arsenal Pass, and it just really, honestly, in about 3 months from when we decided to do that, it just kind of ramped up really quickly. We had all these ideas we wanted to share as much as possible, and the kind of space was at that point more of a blank canvas than it is now. We have so many more amazing content creators in the space now who are giving that information out, but at the time it was really quite light on. So that was a piece of it, and then just the in terms of being a player side of it, that just continued to grow as we had events. Probably, probably for me, it was traveling to, like, the big moment was traveling to Orlando last year in November for US Nationals and the calling. At that point, it was like, yeah, this is going to be a permanent mainstay in my life now and be a big part of the time I spend just outside of my 9 to 5.
Yeah. Now you mentioned Arsenal Pass with Brendan, and what was the, I guess, the spark there between you two? Because you guys do have excellent chemistry, and you have without a doubt the largest podcast in Flesh and Blood right now.
That's funny. I don't know if it's a spark or it's just us being like a bickering old couple, really. Um,
That's what
I
makes it
don't know.
work.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we have a lot of similarities, but also we have a lot of differences, and I think that's kind of what's worked for us. We're very different in the way that we even test and work. Like, we have different methods. We spend a reasonable amount of time together, but also we spend a lot of time apart, and we do things. Even the last few seasons we've like tested separately, and I think that's actually helped us in terms of the way that we talk about the game. But yeah, I mean, we met through a mutual friend, through Sasha Markovic, and then we just kind of started having conversations, started trying to find times during the day to play. I think we just, as first of all, as friends, just kind of hit it off, and then that's what made it easy as a decision. Like, I think, like, friends first, and then podcast partners second, I think.
That's fun. That's fun to hear. Now, in terms of podcasting, did you have a passion for listening to podcasts or even creating podcasts before Arsenal Pass?
Definitely listening. I love listening to podcasts. I do, as I say, I do a lot of travel, so that's a big part of my kind of way to not kill time, but try and use my time efficiently. I listen to a lot of music as well, but I also like to try and learn something when I have this kind of downtime. Or I never like to feel like I have idle hands. So at least when I'm traveling, I can still feel like I'm maybe learning something. Or so, like, history podcasts, or I guess the classic, like, murder mystery podcast I've listened to a little bit, but I definitely listen to a lot of podcasts, but I never really had a passion or an idea that I would ever podcast myself. It was never on my radar, just because I just don't think it's something that I ever thought I'd be good at, and I still don't think I'm great, but I'm learning. But yeah, it was never sort of on my radar, for sure.
Well, I mean, you're certainly a great podcaster. I will say that. Now, did it, when you started doing it, since you had never done it before, was that something that you felt comfortable, or did you build up to a comfortability? How was that process for you?
Oh, I felt so uncomfortable.
Oh
I, I
no.
s- I still do now, to some degree, feel somewhat uncomfortable. Usually, if it's me, myself, or me and Brendan, myself, I find it a lot easier. When I have, yeah, I guess when we have guests on, or when I speak to other people, I find that more difficult still. I think, just in terms of, um, I'm not really sure what it is. I think it's just the entertainment factor and making sure that I don't get too in my own head. But no, I mean now I love it. I enjoy it. I love what we do. I love being able to do like this as well, being on Fresh and Buds and things like this. So I guess it's just kind of developed for me over time.
Yeah, well, that's it's great to see. I mean, you never know what the creator is feeling. I've found, and I'm sure when you feel uncomfortable, nobody can tell. But it is always interesting to know, like some of the best podcasters in the world get uncomfortable sometimes. So, do
Well,
you have any podcasts in your rotation that you listen to throughout the week?
yeah, definitely. I was actually going to say, you'd feel the same. I'm sure. I'm not sure if you have what experience you've had, but even just when you decide to do something like this, it's actually, even if it's for personal reasons, it feels quite daunting, right? And
Hmm.
although other people don't hear and see what you go through, it's still you still feel like people do, right? I'm not sure if you have a similar feeling, but that's how I felt.
I mean, to me, I was always comfortable with the podcast part. I think eh, personally, my struggle when I first started this podcast was putting it out there and like just my natural self confidence. I always was like, oh
Mhm.
well, people think I'm an idiot. So I've gotten past that at this point, but I remember the first couple months like do people even like this or whatever? But you get past that, I think.
Yeah, but they do. And yeah, it is hard to be a self promoter, and you do have to be your biggest self promoter, especially at the start. So
Hmm.
it's not always natural and comfortable. In terms of, yeah, I mean podcasts that you asked about, podcasts I listen to, right? My rotation.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Throughout the
Great
week,
strategy.
like I personally listen to a ton of podcasts, and I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah, I rotate through. So some are like seasonal podcasts I listen to. Um, so like the Dollop is like a big one for me. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dollop, but it's an
Hmm.
American history podcast by two comedians. I like that. Blank Check, which is a movie podcast. I'm a big movie buff, although I don't watch as many as I used to. Of course, there's some flesh and blood podcasts in there. I try and there's more and more, and I try and put them on some rotations to listen to groups of podcasts. So of course yourself, Take Action podcast, Instant Speak podcast. I've made sure to listen to groups of episodes, and then I also listen to like fantasy football, fantasy soccer. Sorry, so a little bit different. There's a podcast I really like. Mostly, I play fantasy soccer when it's on with my like sort of office league, but it's a lot less. It's not like fantasy football in the US where it's very it's a lot of time and effort. I kind of just check the app every sort of once a week, twice a week, and then I listen to this particular podcast because I like the hosts. And then recently I started listening to like a philosophy podcast just because I wanted to learn more about philosophy, and I thought the host was quite engaging.
Well, I'll tell you what, Hayden. If you watch the way I play fantasy football, you won't think that I'm putting much effort at all.
That guy
but
looks good.
yeah, but that's awesome. That's awesome. Those are all some great podcasts, and it is interesting to see where people or podcasters kind of draw inspiration from. Do you have like a specific podcast idol?
I think I have one, but I think over my time, the past few months listening to Flesh and Blood podcasts, I kind of idolize everyone in our space who does this. Whether it be yourself, whether it be someone like a Taylor Morrow, from the Attack Action podcast, whether it be Flake. I think everyone honestly has made me feel um, I guess given me more desire to up my game, to be honest, and be a better podcaster. But the one in particular who I had the absolute pleasure of meeting in New Jersey is Brian Gottlieb. Brian Gottlieb, who is become a mainstay on coverage for Flesh and Blood at this point over New Jersey and Indianapolis. Um, does the Arena Decklist podcast. I was a big time Magic player. It was the number one podcast I listened to when I played sort of Magic towards the back end of my time playing Magic, and someone that I really sort of respected for the way he, I guess, approaches topics, the way he has conversations, and I, yeah, as well got the absolute pleasure to meet him in New Jersey. So he's definitely up there for me.
It's funny you say that. I had always known of Brian Gottlieb, and I had never listened to any of his podcasts because when I played Magic, I was a big limited guy, so it was just like limited resources
Yeah.
on repeat. But since seeing Brian cast Flesh and Blood events, I mean, he is just an absolute pro. So that must have been really cool to get to chat with him.
Yeah, I always try and pick his brain every now and again just to. He is just so experienced, and I've been also lucky enough to. He's come on to Arsenal Pass a couple of times. We did a preview for one of the callings. We had him on sort of I guess we did this segment for a while where we just had people come on to talk about their Flesh and Blood experiences and their time in the game, which we don't do as much of now, just because I think there's better people like yourself, like Flake, that are doing this and do the interview style better than we do, to be honest. But yeah, it's such an awesome guy, such a lovely guy, and yeah, like you say, just a pro, just so good at what he does, and
Yeah.
loves the game,
Oh
absolutely
yeah.
loves the game.
He has definitely become a champion of the game, which is always great to see. Now, the last podcast question I have for you here is how do you consume your podcast? Is it audio or video? Because one thing that I found when I started doing this podcast, and it was bizarre to me because maybe I'm a boomer, but when I would tell people I had a podcast, they're like, oh, is it you on YouTube? And I was like, yeah, the audio is. But how do you consume your podcast?
So funny, we had a very similar experience where we are now video and audio, but we didn't do video until the start of this year, actually. So our first kind of, I think, 7 or 8 months of us podcasting was just pure audio. That's the way I've always consumed my podcast, is audio. It's an on the run thing. It's not really something I do while I'm at my computer. I get so distracted. Like if I'm working and I try and watch a video as well, I just end up realizing 10 minutes later I haven't actually done any work. So I can do it on audio. Video is just too many mediums. But so yeah, it's always been audio for me, but I love that there's this option to have this video. I mean, it lets you engage with people, I think. So it's a very different way to do it, I think, than maybe, podcasts have always been podcasts. They're audio, but I think to have this idea of being able to visually interact as well is quite a cool thing. And there was actually one podcast I used to listen to that I would watch on video because I found the way that the hosts sort of their body language was really engaging. So I always tried to watch it on sort of the visual side on YouTube as well. But yeah, otherwise traditionally it's always been audio for me. I'm a boomer as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've come around on the video. I've come around, but I'm like you. I'm rarely in front of my computer, at least for work, and if I am, I do get quite distracted. But that is right. So I want to get to the next segment of the show, and this is a segment I like to call the Fresh Faves. It's basically where I'm going to ask you a couple of your favorite things in Flesh and Blood, and you give me an answer. Are you
Let's
ready?
do it.
All right.
Oh, definitely.
First, who is your favorite hero?
Oh, easy, not close. Reiner, of course.
Oh, hell yeah! Reinar's awesome. I'm a Leviah guy myself, but Reinar, if I have to play Reinar, I'm not too upset.
You're still playing a brute.
Yeah, exactly. A brute's a brute. Now, what is your favorite weapon?
Oh, I have a very particular favorite weapon. Plasma Barrel Shot is my favorite weapon from Crucible of War, and I think it's mostly just down to pure design and aesthetics of that card. I think it's a really interesting design. It's never really been powerful enough to, I think, to see like competitive play, but I played it in like CC decks back in Crucible, in armories. I played it in the last skirmish season in a dash deck, and it's a weapon I think is really fun. I think it looks cool and has a cool name. So
Great answer. Great answer. What is your favorite equipment?
that probably changes being a competitive player. I think the equipment's such a big part of the game. I've gone through, I guess, like some of the classics. I've really enjoyed the sort of like the power level of some of the commons in this game, especially in early sets like Goliath Gauntlets or Hardened Cross Trap or Vest of the First Fist. But it's probably, in all honesty, just for the way that it works, the design space of it, and maybe even the power level, like Spellbound Creepers, I think is probably the most interesting and probably therefore my favorite piece of equipment, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean that card alone like opened up so much building space in decks, Runeblade decks specifically, when
Yep.
that card came out. Now, what is your favorite non-hero weapon or equipment card? Your run-of-the-mill cards, actions, attack actions, instance.
Well, Tommy, as a Rhinar player, I think I can only have one answer, and it's got to be Blood Rush Bellows. I think that card is not only very powerful, but also very fun. And just finished up the calling this weekend, and I got to play a lot of Blood Rush Bellows on turn ones and deal a lot of damage and intimidate a lot of cards. So it's going to be Blood Rush Bellow for me.
I mean, understandably, that card is feared for good reasons. I love that card quite a bit. But yeah, that was the fresh faves. Thank you so much, Hayden. And if you're game for it, I do have some listener questions from the Fresh and Buds Discord. Are you ready to roll?
Of course, yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Well, the first one comes from I'm Jorman, who is Jordan from the Flesh and Pod podcast. He first asks, "How is he so hot?" Referring to you.
I live in Australia, so it's very warm down here.
Oh, yeah. That's a great answer. And he asks, do you have a favorite IPL team? For those who don't know, that is the Indian Premier League.
It is, yeah. Interesting. You know what? When it comes to cricket, I watch a lot of the Black Caps play. So the New Zealand team, I watch a lot of them primarily. And then kind of, we have a big competition here in Australia, which is called like the Big Bash, which is similar to the IPL, although with a lot less money. For context, I guess the IPL, it's like the NBA, I guess, of like sports. Like it has so much money in it, and people get like bid on for contracts and stuff. It's like a big thing. But I don't watch a lot of the IPL, actually, to be honest. I don't watch a lot of 2020 cricket outside of the Big Bash League here. I watch a lot of ODIs and sometimes test matches. But if I did have a favorite team, it'd probably be the Challengers, Royal Challengers, which are in Bangalore, just because they have one of my favorite sort of all-time players. Well, they used to be the coach in Daniel Vettori. So it's a lot of gibberish for anyone who doesn't watch cricket. But I'm sure Jordan understands what I just said. So.
Well, what about Big Bash League? I myself, when I first started watching cricket, I planted my flag on the Sydney Sixers.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, the Sydney Thunder is my local team, so okay. We're crosstown rivals, I guess, in some ways.
Cool. Now, Darth Prentice, aka Greg, asks, what deck or decks do you think will be on top of the CC meta this upcoming season?
Oh, you're gonna love my answer. I actually have no clue, but I can spitball some of my early ideas. I think it's gonna be really difficult. I think this is we're about to experience the biggest shakeup in Classic Constructed with Star of the Show and Chain leaving the meta and a new set coming in. Like that's a really big. We haven't really had this kind of large, I guess, change in a meta in so long, because we had bannings, yeah, and we had new sets come in, but nothing really coincided. You could say maybe like Chains with Seeds going out would be like the largest one beforehand. But then we kind of had a Briar come into it immediately, and that might happen again. We might have another deck that could take over. But what I kind of see is that a lot of these decks that have been really established as kind of like tier 1, tier 1.5, even to tier 2 decks, so your Ultims, your Prisms, your Briars, Lexies, are going to kind of be what define the metagame early in terms of what people are testing into and trying to understand how to maybe beat these decks. And then people just going to come up with like the best build of Fire they can, the best build of Dromai, and the best build of Icelander. And then that's going to probably determine what the meta looks like early. In terms of what I think that'll actually look like, I think Dromai looks really powerful to me. I haven't messed around with anything yet in terms of like playing games. I'm kind of taking a week and a bit off Flesh and Blood just to decompress and relax and not think too much about it. I mean, I always think about Flesh and Blood, so it's hard not to, but not play games for a bit until the pre-release this weekend. So yeah, I think that's probably where we'll start. I think we're going to see a format that's still, I don't think it's going to slow down massively. Like in terms of you've got Icelander, you can have Ultim around, but I think we're still going to see, like even maybe it's Fire, it's Briar, we're still going to see explosive decks, and I don't think these kind of 5-card hands are going anywhere in this game. So decks are still going to have to be able to either deal with that or deal really significant damage with good 5-card hands. I think Dromai is one that can maybe break the mold a little bit, as Prism seem to do in terms of this more consistent game plan with board states. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with both Dromai and Prism. It feels like they're going to dictate a lot of what happens in this meta game. And Prism inherently is powerful. Like it was powerful in the last format, it's still powerful. So something to watch out for.
Yeah. So in short, Darth Brentis, Levia. No.
I don't really know. In short, there you go.
The Falcon of the West. You mentioned him earlier, Mr. Taylor Morrow, asks, in what ways is the Attack Action podcast superior to all other podcasts? Now, I'm taking offense to this one as well, just so you know.
Well, I was gonna maybe they have the two most handsome podcasters, but then there's me and you, Tommy. So I don't know. I don't know if they're correct here. No, I mean I love the Attack Action podcast. Shout out to Isaac and Taylor. They do an amazing job, and honestly, one of the first podcasts that I listened to in the Flesh and Blood space. So they're OGs, as it were.
Yeah, same here actually. Well, first of all, they were the first podcast I started listening to when I got into the game, and Taylor was my first guest ever, and
That's amazing.
I was recently on their podcast, and honestly, that was kind of really cool. And but they're not superior to our podcast. No.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, sorry guys. Next, Copy Cody asks, when testing, do you get reps in playing all the heroes, just meta relevant heroes, or an assigned set of heroes determined by your group?
Oh, that's a great question, actually. I don't think anyone's ever really asked me that before.
Oh wow.
So it it depends is kind of the answer. So I think when it comes to like focus testing, we'll generally have an idea of the heroes for that meta that we want to test. So we usually kind of sit down for kind of like a pre-start of testing meeting where we're all kind of talking about the meta, the heroes that we kind of think are maybe fringe that we should take a look at, the heroes that we know are going to be meta dominant and we want to focus on those. And then we might start thinking about ways that maybe we could attack those, and there might be a couple of heroes that kind of bubble to the surface, or strategies maybe that are different to the current heroes. Because it's not just all about heroes, right? We might have a player who's really, maybe if you take Prism for example, right, is really like a hero player. They know all about the insides and outsides of being a hero player, but maybe the aura plan is kind of a bit foreign to them. So another player might pick up on that as opposed to our quote unquote Prism player, right? So basically what might happen after we kind of determine what we think the meta could look like, what we want to test and try and understand is, we generally break up a little bit and say like X player might focus on this, or two players might put their hands up and be like, we're going to test Prism a lot together, or we're going to test the Ultim versus Briar matchup and try and break that, or whatever it is. And people will generally kind of in our groups that we've never really worked with the same group for an event, so we always we've chopped and changed a lot. But we have a few of the same people, and we generally kind of break it up that way. So it's either people who know the most about the heroes, or really interested in what that hero might want to do, or the matchup, or someone will just take it in a complete different direction and say, I'm going to grab that hero and I have a completely different idea that we want to try. So it kind of chops and changes, but we are generally pretty planned about it to an extent, except when new sets come out, then it's kind of just a free-for-all usually, and we don't usually talk to each other. We kind of just go and do our own thing and just get games in and just work out what we think's good.
Yeah, that makes sense. Next, we have Pat Shaw from the Combat Chain podcast, who asks, are you ready to make the heel turn and take out Brendan and join the Wolf Pack?
My question for Pat is, how did they get the script for Proto number 2?
That's a good question. Yeah. Next, we have a question from, I used to call him Drunks on Twitter, but I think it might be Dr. Unks. But we were hanging out with him in Vegas this past weekend. But he asked, what's the strategy to fighting off a great white shark?
Well, my particular strategy is don't go in the ocean. I live in Australia. I live very close to the beach, and I don't really go into the water. So, except sometimes every few years I'll think that I want to be a surfer again, and I'll try and go and get surf lessons or go out for a surf. And usually that lasts for like a couple of weekends, and then I'll call it off again. So, but then I just try and avoid them. Usually, I just stay near shark nets and avoid them. I've never. I mean, to be honest, I've never seen a great white shark outside of an aquarium. So, I'll have to come back to you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good strategy to just avoid the water. I mean, but how do you avoid the rest of the extremely dangerous animals in Australia?
You know what? It's much less of an issue in my life than I thought it would be when I was moving here. I assumed that once a week I'd have to like bat off a snake or escape from a deadly poisonous spider. I've had, I think, 2 interactions with animals that could hurt me total in my 5.5 years, and both of those they were just a spider hanging out in my garage, so and outside, so it wasn't much of an issue really.
Not too bad. I actually asked the tall Timmy when he was visiting Jersey. He was like, what's it like? And he was like, oh, yeah, I can't do his accent that well right now, but he was saying it's like it's no problem. You just kick him away with your shoe. I'm like, all right, well, I'll take your word for it. But and one last question before it kind of leads into our kind of main topic here is Popo Mike asks key cards pulling you into each hero for the Uprising sealed format.
Question. I think for me so far, it's a lot about equipment. I think in particular, when I first look at early, I guess sealed formats, is I think equipment are always powerful. So often I'm trying to start there. What equipment do I have? The Sash of Sandakai, which is the Draconic Chest, I think is like maybe the most powerful card in the set. So
Mm-hmm.
that card is always, I'm looking for that card. And then it's just, I mean, I'm probably like a broken record if people ever listen to our podcast, but just what win conditions I have in each of those heroes. So if I'm looking at Dromai, like a particular card I'm looking for is, I'm going to get the name wrong now, Rake the Emberclaw, is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
the one that,
That's the one that transforms, right?
yes, makes an ash and then transforms 3 at red. So I'm looking for like that kind of card. If I'm in Fi, I'm looking for like really good Draconic Chain Link starters. So cards that naturally have Go Again, and then maybe like 1 or 2 good Rupture cards. I'm not actually looking for a ton of Rupture cards. I'm looking for ways to start my chain so that I can utilize my weapon, utilize Phoenix Flames back to my hand. And then I guess if it's Icelander, I'm looking for just a good a good mix of ice cards, a good mix of reasonable blues, and then a couple of good ways to push damage. And the one that deals arcane damage, and if it hits, they discard a card unless they pay 2. That card's really strong, so I'm also looking for that card.
Awesome, awesome. Now that was the listener questions. People can always submit listener questions on the Fresh and Buds Discord, which we call the Buds, and anyone's welcome to join. And it's in the link tree below. Now let's get to the main topic. I wanted to just take a look at each Uprising hero because we're gonna have the pre-release this weekend and then full release the weekend after. I think it would be nice to kind of look at it from like a bird's eye view, kind of from limited, constructed, and flavor too, because who doesn't love flavor? So I figured we'd start off with the talk of the town, Fi. So let's talk about limited. So we both did world premiere events, and right now my first impression on Fi is, well, he's very powerful, but I think in drafts he will be fought over at the table quite a bit. And you have to hope to not really run into any good Icelanders. Also, sealed seem to have come together pretty easily for a lot of people, considering I played against 5 different Fis in my 6 rounds at the world premiere. But I do guess that he will be the deck to beat in the early stages of the draft format. What are your thoughts on Fi in limited, kind of out of the gates here?
Yeah, so I think Fi kind of, I guess you could say, almost dominated the world premiere events. I think a lot of the 6-0s played Fi around the world, and I don't think it's surprising or worrying. Like I think inherently when you break out the cards, Fi has like a really clear game plan, has a weapon, which you do have to an extent with Icelander because it deals damage, but of course with Dromai it's a weapon that grants other abilities like Prism did in previous sets. So I think Fi made a lot of sense in terms of like the day one kind of limited deck to pick up and build out of your sealed pool. I think it's very attackable though as well. Like you're trying to get these chain links, and for instance with Icelander, I think it's something that you can attack really, really well. I think Icelander, even a solid sort of Icelander deck and sealed, plays really well in some of the strongest Fi decks. So I think there's like a nice balance there. In terms of like draft, I mean, I did get to do a draft in the weekend after the event kind of finished, after we got dumped out of top 4. We got some of the friends together and did a draft at the venue. And we actually only had 1 Fi at our table.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, oh, they're going to have a crazy deck. But do you know what? Like in draft, when you can cultivate these plans, these kind of archetypes a bit more, these strategies, it didn't feel as powerful as maybe I thought it would. Like one of the Icelander decks, and I think there was 5 Icelanders at our table.
Oh my God.
I had one of the two Dromais, and my Dromai was okay, but the other Dromai had a really strong plan. I think had the best deck at the table, and then one of the Icelanders I think even had like the second best deck at the table. So it's really interesting in draft. I think it kind of evens out a little bit. I'm a little bit worried about the seal format. I thought it was going to be a little bit slower than it is, and Fi seems to be kind of saying no to that. But I also think we haven't explored as much about some of the ways you can build Drome Iron Sealed. And I think every time I played Icelander in the world premiere, it was scary, and people had some good Icelander decks. I think it's harder to play, and I think it's a bit harder to build.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Now, what are your thoughts on constructed for Fi out of the gates here?
Yeah, I don't know. It's the first I've built up exactly one kind of deck, I guess, in terms of just like drafted something together, and it's been a Fi sort of basically pure redline deck, just as a place to start. Um, One of the things I have with ninjas is like there's all these different pockets of cards you can play with ninja, and some of them just don't quite come together. And then in terms of like the draconic, being a draconic ninja, I think some of the cards that we've had previously just really don't work with fire in terms of some of the other ninja cards previously, and that's kind of giving me pause to think how good is fire going to be. I think there's a lot of talk about how explosive fire is going to be, and maybe be like the premier aggro deck, with a lot of combat chains, doing a lot of sort of crazy stuff with Phoenix Flames and maybe with Mask of Momentum or even with Pouncing Links. I think it's going to be a good option, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what it comes out like, whether people play like these pure aggro decks or more like combo style kind of decks with was it Uprising, with those kind of cards that just push damage on a turn.
Hmm.
So I think we're going to start with like a really aggressive deck, and then we're probably going to move towards something that's a bit more sort of combo orientated with Fire.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Now, I find that people are gonna really push that like crazy 30 damage turns or whatever. You see videos on it already, and I think that's gonna be something that people are really interested in. However, I think I mean, you'd be able to say this better than most, but I feel like that will be easy to hate out. Um, Also, I'm as someone who plays Levi, I'm ready to play Talisman of Cremation against those Phoenix Flames. So,
Yep.
which would be really
Exactly. I
fun.
mean, that's something that we're getting more of as this game develops. Is we're getting more ways to deal with powerful things. I know people have said, power creeps could become an issue, and I can kind of see where people are coming from to a degree, but also the kind of inherent game design doesn't really allow for that. And also, what LSS are doing with their printing is also printing cards that allow you to deal with strategies. Whether that be, think about this red line kind of fire deck, and then all of a sudden there's a channel like Frigid on the table.
Hmm.
You know, so it's, or whether, like you said, Talisman of Cremation, lots of other things out there that are interacting. So it'd be really interesting to see what that kind of means for this deck. We've got Channel the Bleak Expanse as like another new ice card as well. Not necessarily just for fire, but for a lot of different things happening in the format.
Yeah, it seems like if there's a target on Fi's back, it's gonna be tougher go of it for Fi for sure. Now, talking about the flavor, I mean, honestly, it's pretty awesome, right? The Phoenix Flame concept is so cool, and I think it really ties into the Ninja Go Wide theme, and then aesthetically, super stellar. Just looking at the adult version of the card is so cool. All the cards, though I will say, when I was playing sealed and draft, because I drafted once, and I drafted a Fi deck, some of the cards looked the same, and I thought I was coming in for different amounts of damage. But outside of that, everything looks really awesome, and I was never really into Katsu as much, but Fi's, flavor wise, I can get a little bit more behind.
Yeah, I think in terms of like the flavor of the set, I mean, first of all, the art is amazing in the set. I think it's
Hmm.
just every set seems to be a step up in terms of art direction and what's happening with the art on the actual cards. And then, the story, I think with Tales of Aria, I felt like we got less kind of flavor with some things, and I felt like we've kind of returned to maybe more of that towards that Monarch sort of era of a bit more sort of flavor happening with these. We had Icelander's Journey, and we had all these things that came out from Legend Story Studios prior to the set's release. I do agree. Some of the art does look really similar. I think Fi, in terms of like flavor, is maybe my least favorite of the three, but I do think I think the play style is really cool, and I think Phoenix Flames. I love these little pieces we have with the set, especially with Limited, in terms of the design and the flavor of the heroes, with the Phoenix Flames, with the Heliod's Mitre, like all these kind of small things that are just a little bit different to what we've experienced in the past. I like a really cool way to go about having heroes, and particularly, like you say, Phoenix Flames for Fire is like a really cool thing that just changes the game up.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a good point you said about the flames and the Helios Miter. It kind of sets this really cool precedent for limited, or draft and unlimited in general, that I'm excited to see how they expand on, because we always had the crack bobbles, but that was whatever, that was just like the fail safe. But it is kind of nice to know that, hey, I didn't get a headpiece. I'm slotting this thing in. It's not the best, but it's gonna work.
Yeah, it's purposefully designed that way. And I mean, there's only one headpiece in this whole set, right? There's an ice headpiece, or is it a yeah, it's an ice headpiece, and that's
Hmm.
kind of it. So it's about how they balance the game, and it does a lot, right? Like that headpiece is actually, we did our set review for limited yesterday, myself and Brendan, and that headpiece it looks innocuous, right? And I know a lot of people didn't even activate it once during the world premiere, but the card does a lot more than maybe first look, which is quite cool.
Yeah, I had someone activated against me, and it was brutal. So,
There you go.
um, now let's move on to Dromai, the new dragon lady that people are really simping over, as they say. Limited, she was my sealed pool hero in Vegas. My Fi ninja stuff was not the best, and I really didn't have enough blues for Icelander, so I went with Dromai. Now I don't play a whole lot of illusionist, so it was kind of it was an interesting learning curve for me, but it felt like she could have been stronger and sealed from what I saw. But I also know that after the first two rounds, I kind of had to reevaluate how I was playing her, and I think that's what we're going to see a lot of with her. That we don't know the exact way to build and play her yet to her full potential. But she can have the ability to kind of really eat up some Icelanders with the Ash Wings. What are your thoughts on Dromai Unlimited so far? I know you drafted her.
I think Dromai is by far the most differentiated hero in terms of limited play style that we've had so far in this game, I think,
Hmm.
which is the challenge. That's why I think you just did not see unfortunately, any Dromai do really well in the world premiere, or even kind of the way people are talking about Dromai to start with in this limited format. It is very different. You're using reds as resources, and you need to in order to get value out of your hero, and that's such an odd concept. And what it can kind of lead to is players basically playing hand cycles and turn cycles where they actually get less out of their hand than they would if they just played a normal game of Flesh and Blood, which is a really weird thing to have happen. But
Hmm.
it's all down to, I guess, understanding what you're trying to do across the whole game, and that's something that we haven't really had as much of in limited. Like in constructed, I think that's something that people are getting really good at, is understanding like what's my game plan. But in constructed, you get to bring your 80 cards, or you get to bring your 51 cards with you every single time and know your strategy inside and out. When you're sat there building a sealed deck or a draft deck, all these small changes in the different cards that you open or draft are going to change that, and there's small nuances to that. I think players will get better at this as they spend more time with Dramai, but I do think it is the hardest to build and play, and really the simple fact is it just plays differently. Not even the invocations, but just the way the ash works, the way the ash wings work, the way you want to try and find damage on any given turn. I do think with Dromai, you really need to play your opponent and not just be able to play your own board. I think if you rip a bunch of like the really good invocation dragons like Kyloria and Team Mayan to Iceland or whatever it is, yeah, you probably just win anyway. But outside of that, you do need to have like a plan, and there's some cards that are powerful, like Rake the Emberclaw that we talked about, and some of these things. But also, if you're having to pay for a lot of these to do things and you're pitching reds all the time, you're actually going to find that you can't really do that much on a turn. So you do still need some amount of resource cards, and you do need to know, sort of have plans for using those. So yeah, a hard hero. I mean, I'm still kind of grappling with how I think I want to approach Dromai in both draft and sealed.
I think that she's the coolest thing about draft to me is going to be how this format evolves, and it probably, if I were to guess, is going to be centered around how many people can figure out Dromai, and it'll be cool to see. Now for constructed, I'm also very interested to see where people end up with her. Uh, do you think she be kind of like her light illusionist prism compatriot, or will she have a different feel, you think?
I think it's gonna be interesting to see. I'm not 100% sure. I do think it's going to be, I guess, a bit more similar to a traditional game plan than Dromai is in limited.
Hmm.
But what that actually ends up looking like, because we've had this experience in the past sort of format where we've had these aura prism builds, and I don't think Dromai is going to be a massive departure from that. But the thing people are going to have to, or the thing that people will have to grapple with, players will have to grapple with, is this continued idea with Dromai of the red resource cards. Now, the chess piece, the equipment piece, I think helps a lot with that. I think that card might be one of the more powerful cards we see in Dromai that adds consistency in constructed. But it's still, you still have to have these plans, and you still, in the past format with Prism, it was like, okay, how do I double aura people? And now it might be like, well, how do I double dragon people? And that might be easy sometimes, and it might be difficult. I'm not really sure what it's going to play out like, but I do think that these kind of, we're going to see these kind of like Ash dragon kind of style mid-range control decks, and that's going to be really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it's a good style of deck to have in the meta. So that's going to be awesome. Now, how about the flavor on her though? I'm in general not crazy about dragons. Like when the dragons were announced, I wasn't like jumping out of my chair, but I do appreciate them here. I think that the Ashwing thing that's going on from an aesthetic standpoint is so cool, and also from a mechanic standpoint, it does feel appropriate for the class, and I think it works big time. How are you viewing Dromai flavor wise?
I feel really similar to you. I think dragons aren't necessarily my favorite thing. And when I found out we're gonna have dragons, I was like, it's a bit early, isn't it? Can't we just wait a little bit longer before we start? I really wanted to see us explore. Like I was really hoping we are gonna go to like the pits or Savage Lands or something next and see these kind of worlds that we already I kind of knew about be fleshed out a bit more. Volcor is, I think, really cool, but it's also a bit more like mysterious, and of course, it's there's mountains and there's dragons, and it's a different world. But in saying that, I think it's done really well, and I agree with you. Like the idea of the way Ash works is, I think, a really cool thing from a design standpoint and a flavor standpoint, and also just we didn't talk about this with Fire, but just draconic cards in general, the draconic talent. I think that's really interesting in how these cards you can look at one card and it has very different applications for Dromai and Fire, but also be very playable. I think that's even in the specializations, which is really cool. And you've got Phoenix Flames obviously in Fire, and the way that works from I guess a gameplay standpoint is very different to how you go wide with Dromai with Ash Wings, which is a very more patient style. And it's about building up to it. So I think that kind of comes across in the design of the cards, the flavor of the cards, and kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think out of the gates when I heard Draconic be announced, I was thinking, oh, is this just going to be more arcane damage stuff? But I'm glad that they didn't go that route, because Kano kind of has that Draconic feel, but it's not. I think they really hit a home run with Draconic. I think it's awesome, and I think it's going to be a lot of people's like favorites for a long time.
Yeah. I don't think it'll be mine, but
yeah. That being said, let's talk about some Icelanders here. We are getting to enjoy Icelander in limited for the first time, and my experience so far is, if she is open at the table, she is scary. I mean, the power level of a lot of her cards is pretty insane, and I think that's going to be such a good place to be in the beginning of the format. And, especially if you already have experience with how she plays out in Blitz, I think that you're going to be mooning some people, as they say, with her quite a bit. And you can really capitalize on people forcing, like those go wide Fi decks.
Icelander is, I think, probably the hero that's going to get figured out next. I think people have a pretty reasonable handle on Fire. It's maybe the most straightforward. I think there's still more. I think people are playing Fire super aggressively, and I think people are going to pull back. I personally, at the World Premiere, my Fire deck was a little bit less aggressive, and played a lot of cards like Oasis Respite and the Sigil of Protection, things like this, a bit more defensive in nature. But I think people are going to start to figure that out a bit more. I think with Icelander, the play patterns are the hardest thing to get your head around. There's times where it's actually correct to sacrifice damage to keep your life total higher, so that you can then set up this kind of train of 2 or 3 turns in a row where you can trigger frostbites, you can play cards out of arsenal, and you can deal damage and start to really tax your opponent's resources. And I think the hardest thing with Icelander is you really have to play both sides of the table and limited, and understand like what you're trying to do is going to interact with your opponent, and whether it's the right time to do it. I think there's going to be cases where you're going to sit with a card in arsenal for 2 or 3 turns in a row because it's the right decision based on the card you have in hand. I think this idea of being a play pattern of, okay, my turn, play 1 card, opponent's turn, flip a card, give them a frostbite, do something, with maybe the weapon, and then next turn set it all up again. I don't think that's actually going to be the preferred playstyle once people get into this limited format and understand how to, especially when you're trying to deal with Dromai and things like that. Just trying to straight up deal with all their allies and then also deal them damage is not really that efficient a strategy. I think it can really hurt you, especially if they land something like a Team Eye or something that stops you from having the ability to actually play on your opponent's turn. So yeah, I think the play patterns of, well, I said before, like Dromai is going to be the hardest to sort of understand and come up with plans for. I actually think the turn-to-turn play with Icelander is kind of the more difficult. But I think the decks in some ways can really build themselves. Although I do think there's a couple of archetypes that you can sort of maybe go after and draft. And I'm looking forward to really getting in, sinking my teeth and doing some drafts over the next 2 weeks and exploring that.
Oh yeah, me and you both, buddy. Me and you both. I can't wait to see how it plays out. Now for constructed, my intuition is telling me that she's going to be somewhat of a deck to look out for. I think there's a lot of different ways to build her, from the kind of close to traditional. I don't think you can be super traditional with her wizard deck, but you can probably build some cool control wizard style decks. And then we've even seen some stuff in Blitz with her in terms of like the fire breathing like finishers and stuff like that, which was I always thought was super cool. I love threat of activation and stuff like that. Where are you seeing her land?
There's a few cards from the new set that I think are super interesting in terms of, like obviously Frost Hex and Channel the Bleak Expanse, more of this kind of hate orientated or sort of tax orientated things that come out with Ice now. And whether that means that that's Icelander's kind of primary game plan, I'm not sure. I think we're going to see people try that, players try that initially, this kind of idea of a kind of, slow the game down, tax the opponent and chip away at them. And then maybe you have this kind of small combo finish, or you kind of barrage them with damage late. Or maybe it is something like you say with this kind of like some attack actions in the deck. I'm honestly not sure where to start with it. I think some of the cards that just kind of maybe I can throw out there that are kind of drawing my eye are actually things like Aether Icevein. So cards that deal damage plus also tax the opponent. I think this card's really strong and limited, and I think it's going to translate through to constructed as well. And then some of these ways where you can start to basically look to lock out sections of the game. So cards like maybe Succumb to Winter could be interesting and constructed for the ability to destroy Arsenal cards and break up what your opponent's trying to do. But yeah, I think Icelander looks to be good in Blitz. I'm just not as sure about constructed yet. I'm not really sure where she's going to land, but she definitely has some pretty strong tools. So it'll be interesting to see what players come up with. But that's kind of where I'm starting, is maybe this idea of trying to find these combinations of cards sort of in the mid game. I'm looking more damage up front and then maybe trying to lock my opponent out in the mid to late game as opposed to the other way around.
It's interesting. That's interesting. I am excited to see. I think a lot of people are going to be brewing her like extensively, and we're going to see some like wacky builds. Hopefully some of them are good. But
No doubt.
let's talk about flavor here. I mean, personally for me, Ice Wizard, that's really cool. Right, we've seen her already, and we knew she was super cool. But I also kind of enjoyed the fact that it's a good example of using a talent to make a hero feel different from the original class. I look at Kano and Icelander, and it feels so different, and I think the ice kind of really helped that.
Oh, I think they feel worlds apart, both figuratively and literally in terms of where they are. And I agree. I think that's so cool. I also think the flavor of having Icelander journey to Volcor is such a cool thing for this game to have. It's not it's not something that we've approached before. It's all been very in world, right? You have Arya and you have I guess Solana and the Demonastery and the brutes hanging out in the Savage Lands, and now all of a sudden you've got this pilgrimage being made by Icelander, and I think it adds this really cool dimension from both a flavor standpoint, but also a gameplay design. You have these two draconic heroes, and then you have this ice hero, and that adds a lot to the way that you play the game. In terms of everything else, I agree with you. I think like Kano feels very different. I'm a big Kano fan, but I'm less of an Icelander fan. But I do love. First of all, I love the art. I think the Icelander's art in this and the ice art is my favorite of the set. And also just kind of the way that this looks to maybe, at least the way it looks like it might want to play is really appealing to me, I think. So yeah, I think all round it's kind of a home run with what they've done bringing Icelander into the set.
Yeah, and they're clearly looking at things from a top-down perspective and design from all aspects, which I think is such a good way to approach a game, and I think it's great, and Overall, though, how would you rate the the collective heroes coming out of Uprising? Was this what the game needed, or is it more the same?
Do you know what? It's early doors, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to say now, but I do think my kind of first impressions is really pleased with what they've done for limited. I think that and that's always kind of my I'm a big limited player, so like you have been a Magic the Gathering. I was definitely a big draft fanatic. Tried to draft every week, and limited's always going to be my bread and butter. And I love that LSS are definitely pursuing a really strong limited game. And there's so all the different things that come into it, the different design elements is really interesting and makes for an interesting limited format. On the constructed format, I don't know yet. I'm like I do have some concerns about the power level of the set, and actually kind of the other way. I'm a little bit worried that this set doesn't impact constructed that much. But I think that might just be kind of my early thoughts and not really having a clear direction of where these heroes might go. I know there's people out there who have already been testing for a week and would have a much better idea than I would have of what's maybe good and what this is kind of doing to the format. But I think limited, I give them definitely a big tick so far already. And then now it's time to see what happens in our constructed formats in Blitz and Classic Constructed.
Yeah, it's going to be very excited to see. Now, something that I wanted to ask you that involves both is we do have the Pro Tour in France in August, which will be split format, thank God. Um, I want to know, first of all, which hero will be the best, or which hero do you think will be the best performing in the limited portion? And I want to know who you think the best performing constructed hero will be, very early on prediction without any testing.
It's quite an early prediction. I'll just grab my crystal ball out. Um, I think in draft, my initial sort of read on draft is Dromai is very good in draft.
Mhm.
I don't think it's imbalanced or anything, but I do think that Dromai has the potential with players understanding the archetypes and really working on them to be the strongest. So I probably expect Dromai to do the best, I guess, across all the drafts. I actually expect Fire to probably do the worst, but that's a really early read. So clip this, come back to me and prove me wrong. But constructed, I honestly I don't even know where to start with constructed at the moment. It's sort of it's like a job for another week for me at the moment. But if I had to just take a bit of a shot in the dark based on what I've seen so far, I do think that it's not going to be one of the current heroes. I think there's so much happening with the other heroes that we haven't seen be explored so far. And even I guess looking at what happened with the Pro Tour, Chain wins that Pro Tour, Star of the Show doesn't. We see two Kanos in the top eight. We see a Prism in the top eight. Like, that Pro Tour, I think when you get to the Pro Tour level, players are really focused on specific game plans and specific ways to attack the meta, as opposed to at a calling level. I think you need to be, and rightly so, need to kind of go wide with it because you could play anything, especially on day one, but even day two. So I think we're probably going to see something like Ultims do well, Prisms do well, if they're in the meta come Pro Tour time.
All right, all right. Well, I know she didn't say any brute, but maybe that's because you're trying
I
to.
know.
You're going to be
I don't
showing up
want
with
to.
Rhinar.
I just don't want to. At this point, I just don't want to jinx it. I would love Brute to be good, and in theory, Rhino looks quite good into some of these new heroes. But I just don't want to. Tommy, I just don't want to call it. If I get to play Brute in the next Pro Tour, if I get to go Pro Tour 1 Kano, Pro Tour 2 a Brute, whether they even if it be Livia, I'll even play Livia. It's fine. Then I'd be happy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I am hoping for the sake of all brute players out there that will come true for you. But this has been a real pleasure, Hayden. I'm so happy that you came on. This is I was looking forward to this ever since New Jersey. I would love for you to kind of plug all your things. A lot of people know you already, but I want you to plug anything you want to plug right now. And yeah, thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's been my pleasure, and so glad that we got to meet in New Jersey. I had a few mutual acquaintances say that I had to come up and meet you, and I'm glad that we got to have a conversation and now come on and do this. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for the pod and for what you do for the community. if you want to follow myself, or I guess what we do, so I'm one half of Arsenal Pass. We're a Flesh and Blood podcast and YouTube channel. We do a lot of, I guess, more competitive content and sort of like level up styles with our videos that we do, and try and get that content out to the world. Also on Twitter. I mean, Fab Twitter is like a really cool place. I was always worried about Twitter. I'm not sure if you're the same, Tommy, but Fab Twitter's been a good spot, I would say. So I'm on Twitter at Fian_Dale, like the tunic. And yeah, otherwise Arsenal Pass on YouTube.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I should shout out Jim from Eye of the Storm, who really, I guess talked me up to you apparently. Good local Jersey guy, and he's become a good friend. But for myself, you guys can all still continue to follow me on Twitter at FreshBudsPod. The Discord, the Buds, is available in the link tree below. You can subscribe to the YouTube, rate on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you guys listen to it, and also check out the Patreon if you're so inclined. And Hayden, I always like to end the show with a little bit about food, because I love food and I think it's the great unifier. And I know you guys have a command and cookout, though. I guess the cookout section on this show is just the cookout part. But we have a question from Mr. Viz, aka Gary, on the Discord, who says, if you were stuck on a desert island, what album, book, food, and game would you bring?
Oh wow, that's a good question to end a show on. So album, first of all, right? You said album. Mm-hmm. If I could only bring one, it'd probably be a Red Hot Chili Peppers album. It might be Stadium Arcadium. I don't know if people are Red Hot Chili Peppers fans, but that's one of my favorite albums from them. What was next?
Album, book. So first of all, I should say Stadium Arcadium. That was like huge high school album for myself. Great choice.
Yeah, likewise.
Book.
Book would be, it's got to be Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I've talked it up on our podcast a few times. It's my favorite book, hands down. So that's coming with me. And food, right?
Yeah, food. Yeah, the most important part.
Is the toughest one as well. Yeah. To be honest. Food wise, you know what? It's probably some sort of curry. I'm bringing a curry with me. Probably, I don't know, maybe a Thai green curry.
It sounds amazing, and
I love food as well.
Oh yeah, and game.
I mean, I think it's got to be Flesh and Blood. I think even if I can just bring like the dual decks or something, it'll give me endless entertainment, I'm sure.
Yeah, bring the new. That's what the classic battles was made for, to bring to a desert island, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. So those are great answers. I know that the buds want to know what my answers are. I think it's Palomino by Trampled by Turtles, my favorite band. The book would be Dead Harvest by Chris Holm. Food, God, blue cheese dressing, and game is Flesh and Blood. But thank you all. Thank you, Hayden. And everybody, please have a great week.